So let's kick off. First up on our virtual stage is Cameron Hawkins, Head of Energy and Environment at NHS Property Services, which own roughly 10% of the NHS estate. Cameron joined the team in December 2018 and since then has employed some brilliant schemes within the organisation to reduce its environmental impact. In 2019, Cameron led the team in launching its 3-year energy and environment strategy, which has so far resulted in a total saving of 16.6 million and 14,300 tonnes of CO2 equivalent across NHS PS sites. Cameron will be discussing the importance of decarbonising the NHS estate, the challenges facing the healthcare system in reaching its net zero goals, and sharing some examples of how his team has been able to make such significant reductions in its carbon use over the past 2 years. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Cameron.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Helen, for that introduction. If we can jump to the next slide, please, my first slide. In preparation for the presentation today, it gave me an opportunity to reflect on the last couple of years and the changes we've seen. While we've been dealing with a pandemic that has changed how we live, work, and play, and established a new norm. It's given us an opportunity for all of us to be able to reflect on how we live our lives. So when in September 2020, David Attenborough joined Instagram and asked for a global response to climate change and conservation, a message that Greta Thunberg, scientists, and protest groups such as Extinction Rebellion have been using their own methods to try and get across. And it wasn't received as just another call to action. It broke social media records, outperforming Friends star Jennifer Aniston and turning Sir David into one of those elite influencers in the world, engaging yet another group of society along the way. For those of us that have been working in this industry for a while now, in my case, my whole career, and that's only if you discount the time I was delivering newspapers and working in fast food restaurants as a kid. This ask is no surprise to us. It's something that we've been working towards, often out of a personal passion, but often under the constraints of trying to get a commercial payback, or using the threat of legislation to try and get some funding to be able to actually implement some of these aspects. Now, as you can see on this slide, I kind of reference the recent release of the IPCC report, and I thought the BBC summarised it quite well in saying that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and it is down to us. Now, taking the old saying that a picture is 1,000 words, it's hard to go past having a show us your stripes image of average temperatures. One I've got here is from the UK, but I think the reason why we see it so often is because it paints such a good image in terms of the situation that we're in, and there's increasing temperatures, and to back up the IPCC report in terms of the not only the increasing temperatures but our influence that we're having on it. So it's hard to get away from the message now. It's continually getting reinforced, and that we need to take this immediate and sustained action. And that's not only to limit the damage, but also to prepare for the change that's already happening around us. So it came as no great surprise when NHS England committed to being net zero, but when they released the carbon footprint, it was going to always be a challenging target, I think. And then when they decided to beat the government to it and say, well, 2050 is not good enough, 2040 is where we want to target, it just increases that challenge, and I think it was one that was needed to actually really put the line in the sand to say that as such a big consumer, as such a big contributor to the UK's carbon footprint, it was a challenge that needed to be laid down. Now, so when this came out, I thought, I'll have a little bit look at it a little bit further, and I think it came quite clear, and as Helen mentioned in the opening statement, is that this isn't a challenge that is just limited to one area. We've got clinical services with anesthetic gases and inhalers, etc. like this. You've got the infrastructure side of things, and we've all got also the suppliers. And we've all got quite a key role to be able to play in this. Now, I will admit, I was half expecting the greener NHS team to put some greenwash on it and to potentially dilute it, just due to the sheer scale of the challenge that was available. But I have to say, and credit to them, and picking up the challenge of not only setting the target of 2040. But the way that they've gone through and outlined the targets around the NHS carbon footprint, which covers our typical Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. It's also outlined that the NHS carbon footprint plus. And so that brings in our Scope 3 emissions and our supplier base into consideration. So not a small challenge, no greenwash here. This is quite ambitious targets. And so I think as a system, we've got an obligation to be able to try and pick up this challenge and deliver it. Now, I'll also point out that hopefully you've all seen the agenda for today, and my credit goes to NHSE in terms of being able to get the necessary speakers together to be able to actually cover all these topics. And so hopefully there is something here for you, for everybody for today. As Helen said, I'm the head of energy and environment from NHS Property Services, and we have the role as landlord and service provider to about 10% of the NHS. So if you put that into some numbers, that's about 3,000 sites. We have over 7,000 different tenancies. We have 5,000 staff. Most of those are actually cleaners, frontline staff, and I've been going around throughout the pandemic and sort of making sure that the hospitals and health centres have been cleaned. But in the context of today's conversation is when we did our carbon footprint, we've got over 100,000 tonnes of CO2 that we produce annually. Now that is predominantly from electricity and gas. Gas being obviously probably our biggest challenge going forward in terms of what that will look like. But we've also got that challenge around being a landlord. So why we might provide the infrastructure and the mechanism for people to be able to use energy. We've got this interaction with our tenants, etc., to be able to work out how they want to use the site, whether it's going to be used for birthing pools, chemotherapy, whether it's your local GP practice. And being able to understand what the demands are of that site, so that we can not only try and meet the NHS's targets of being net zero, but also making sure that we've got infrastructure and healthcare facilities that are going to be fit for purpose for years to come. So there's no getting away from it for us at Property Services. So we've recognised that, and as Helen said, we've been working quite hard and over the last couple of years in terms of what we've been describing as our enabling phase. We've gone through, we relaunched our engagement program. We've been able to convince our CFO to give us a bit of cash to be able to invest, and as we've been able to invest and be able to produce commercial paybacks and actually bring our cost savings back to our tenants, the organisation's felt more and more comfortable in terms of releasing more money to us. So as Helen said, we've had over £16 million worth of savings in the last 2 years, and we should be comfortably on track to be able to exceed, to get over 20 million by the end of this year. Now, while the grid decarbonising has helped us reduce our carbon footprint, we've also been able to actively reduce that by 14,000 tonnes. And as I said, that's been predominantly around installing LEDs, getting some good BMS strategies in place, repurposing the NHS portfolio. A lot of people might not recognise our role, but we are often asked to go through and optimise a portfolio. So to be able to look to see where critical community services are required, what the local trusts need to be able to provide those services, and then optimise the portfolio in that regards. So making sure that we have got the best buildings there to be able to provide the NHS with its services long term. Now, as I mentioned, we were in this enabling phase, and a lot of that was to get the necessary data and information together to be able to, so that we could actually start to make some of these long-term commitments. One of these such commitments, I'm pleased to say that I can now make public, is that our executive committee and our board have agreed to achieving net zero carbon by 2040. Now, while this has been an aspiration for some time, and I appreciate many others have been able to make this commitment before us, we wanted to make sure that all parties were informed, and that what was going to be required to be able to deliver this in terms of resource, funding, and the changes to the organisational structure was all going to be in place, and everybody knew what their role was. So while it's taken a while for us to be able to get the business case together, the challenge has been accepted, as I say, by everybody in the organisation, and it's now back to my team to be able to coordinate that and to be able to deliver that. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So I think it's in terms of building the business case and to be able to deliver the net zero carbon. I think it's fair to say we've learned a lot, particularly around what it means to decarbonise. And we're finding that this is a very different conversation to what we've been having previously in terms of how can we make our sites more energy efficient? How can we get cost savings? What do we need to do to be able to comply with various bits of environmental legislation? Now, with any bit of learning, it hasn't all gone to plan, and we've kind of been able to identify these sort of 5 areas as probably being our biggest challenges in terms of not only getting us through that enabling phase and understanding what the problem is, but also in terms of what we see the future challenges in terms of what we need to be able to have in place to be able to deliver net zero. Now, historically, myself, 20 odd years as being an energy manager, the role that I've had and various energy managers and sustainability managers will probably recognise is that we've been tasked to try and reduce costs and carbon, but always ensuring that there was enough cost savings there to ensure the scheme had a commercial payback. Now this always resulted in your easy wins, your low hanging fruit. So these being things like lighting, controls via building management system, and trying to find those marginal gains that you could achieve when you had a large bit of kit being replaced. So this might have been a pump. Okay, we're replacing a pump. Can we put variable speed drives on it? Oh, we're putting an air handling unit in it. Can we put heat recovery in it? Can we put lower temperature heat exchangers in that? Or when we're replacing boilers, can we move to something that's more energy efficient when in terms of whether that's condensing boilers or something else? So, and when we got to the new build situation, again, you had those challenges around how much could you put into the initial spec and how much would then be valued engineered out of it as those finance and those critical services started to come into play, and those conversations around what can we actually afford. We used to always get a bit clever. I'm sure people would recognise that you'd had to get a little bit creative, and you'd start to add like maintenance savings and whole life cost savings into these sort of business cases to try and increase that model and try and increase the savings that you would achieve to be able to justify the projects. Now, as I mentioned, we've been relatively successful at property services over the last couple of years. We've been able to invest over £8 million into LEDs. That's converted 80 odd sites to 100% LED lighting, and this is a program that we see continuing for across the next 5 years until we can kind of get our whole portfolio converted to LEDs. Now, some of those will be through bespoke projects, standalone projects, because as I mentioned before, the commercial payback is there, but we'll also pick that up and through our large customer schemes where we go through and modifying space to make sure that they're fit for purpose, but also we've put schemes in place to be able to make sure that we pick up those as part of our reactive maintenance. So if a light was to go, that we can make sure that we're not replacing those like for like, that we are going through and making those efforts to be able to go through and as we go, put LED lighting in and to get those energy savings, carbon savings along the way. We've also been able to install some artificial intelligence, a little black box that goes through and sits on your building management system. What this does, we'll go through and this will analyse what bits of plant are being turned on and try and find inefficiencies in terms of how the system's being run. While I've used this many times in the past, I'm pleased to say that one of the sites that we've been running it on recently, we've been able to reduce energy consumption by over 22%, with paybacks being less than 3 months. So while we're understanding and why we've been able to build a good track record in terms of being able to introduce energy efficiency and cost savings, what we've been able to find is that when you actually start to look to build the business case to decarbonise, we find that you need to widen the scope. Just beyond these, we can no longer just look at these commercially viable solutions. As what we're finding is these aspects that you need to decarbonise typically won't fit into a 5-year lease or a refresh program if you're if you're having to refresh spaces on a regular basis. And insulation is a perfect example of this, which is can be very complicated and therefore very expensive in a retrofit situation, and often won't meet that commercial payback of maybe a 3-year payback that you might have for a standalone project. But now when we are faced with the challenge of saying, okay, we need to decarbonize, it is not just about these small gains that we need to make along the way. We need to make fundamental changes to our sites. So, for example, when you're faced with the challenge of being able to, you've got a boiler, a gas boiler that's reached the end of the life, and you're looking to be able to replace it with a heat pump. The ability to be able to reduce the demand at that site in the first place has multiple impacts and flows on across the scheme. So being able to reduce that demand for heating in the first place means that you can actually reduce the size of your heat pump that you need to buy. So this will actually have lower capital costs for when you're actually trying to find a bit of a replacement kit for it. But what we're also finding is that our sites, our infrastructure isn't actually being designed to take that size of that electrical load. So now you've got a building that's been designed, and you've got the electrical infrastructure that's been designed in it to be able to provide your lighting, your small power. In our cases, it might be an MRI scanner or a hydrotherapy pool. Those sorts of aspects, have all been sized up for it. But there's that expectation that the gas infrastructure will provide that hot heating and hot water load. So there isn't that power, there isn't that infrastructure to the site. So if you aren't able to reduce the size of the energy consumption within your site beforehand, in terms of what we're describing as enabling works, is that size or that cost to be able to increase the electrical infrastructure in your building can be a showstopper for the installation to go ahead on as its own. So if you're able to reduce that demand, reduce that extra, and create additional electrical capacity, extra bandwidth, you might say, of power going into the site, it means that you can then, as I say, reduce the size of the heat pump that you need up front, but it also gives you that extra capacity and having to reduce the size of the cable that you need in the first place. Now, one of the other points that's probably not mentioned very often, and when we've been looking at it from a whole life cost model aspect, is that electricity is actually 3 to 5 times more expensive than gas. And particularly those that have seen how the market has reacted recently to the gas supply shortages and seeing prices sort of double, if not triple, from last year. There's real cost pressures in terms of how we run our buildings. So again, if you're able to insulate, if you're able to get these enabling works in up front, it means that actually the ongoing running costs of your organization is actually going to be a lot less as well. So now, once you start to bake all those aspects in together, bring them all together, you actually, if you were just to look at insulation on its own as a retrofit project, you wouldn't do it. It's would be something if you did a large scale project or anything like this. It's quite often was just put into that too hard basket. But now with this decarbonisation conversation going on, it is one that once you take it holistically, insulation is a great option. Because it not only will it reduce your upfront costs, but it'll also reduce your ongoing running costs as well. And I'll touch on electric vehicles a little bit later on, because again, they're going to also be competing for that electrical supply that's coming into the building. So it's a very long way of saying, I guess, that you can, no longer just tweak a specification. It's no longer just asking for LEDs instead of fluorescents. It's no longer just asking for a 30-year-old boiler to be replaced by a modern, hopefully condensing boiler. We need to look at that full system. Now, a lot of the projects that we've been able to do is we've been able to do them as a standalone. We've been able to engage with the local team, get the necessary finance available, and we've been able to get that project implemented. But now, when we're having to look at this, you need to process, engage more people in the process, and this is around what is the base specification of the building, what will it be used for, and actually getting that design right at the very first instance. Because as I said, putting insulation as one of the key aspects to be able to decarbonize. So if you can design that in the first aspect, it becomes a lot cheaper. When you move on to that build process, is making sure that these aspects aren't value engineered out. making sure that the actual design is actually implemented on site, so that we aren't having drafts, we aren't having leaks within the building. We are getting the necessary specification of the kit put in, and then there's always that commissioning stage, the point where we're actually, has the design become a reality, and are we actually making this sure? But it doesn't stop there for us. As I said, we're a service provider as well. So we don't, it's not just a case of building a building, building a new hospital, building a new health centre. It's also then we've got the responsibility to be able to run it afterwards. So, and when I mean by run it, it's that aspects of maintaining it. Also, if it was to break, we've got to fix it. And then at the end of life, we've got to then replace it again. So it's and making sure that the nature of how the site is actually run, and those specification changes that have come through, that across to all parties involved. So it might result in different ways that people engage with the site in terms of how people run it, and also making sure that their expectations are understanding that it won't be just a case of you'll be able to turn on the hot water, etc., like that, and it's there. You know, that is what we want, and that is how it's going to happen. But that, in terms of the maintenance behind the scenes, there might be some different systems and processes. There won't be a gas boiler sitting there on the wall for you anymore. So that's the first turn. I think the middle one, I think it goes for budgets. I think the challenge for budgets kind of speaks for itself. We're all here at the mercy of public spending, and it's our taxpayers' money at the end of the day that we want to make sure is being implemented correctly. And I think it's comforting from my side of things that we've seen schemes like the Low Carbon Skills Fund come through, and the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme be produced. Now these two are key schemes in terms of how we're going to actually push forward in terms of being able to deliver it. Now, for those that are unaware, the Low Carbon Skills Fund is money that you can apply for to be able to get your portfolio and also site level decarbonised. Unfortunately, phase 2 of this was 15 million. And that recently I was told that 20 million pounds worth of applications was applied for in the first 2 days. There was also the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme. Again, this is how you... Oh, sorry, no worries. I've been told I've been talking too much. So I think in terms of funding, etc., like this, there is mechanisms out there, but you will need to get that data and that information together in the first place. So good luck, everybody. As you can see, there is plenty to talk about, and if you would like to know more, please let me know. But as I say, I've got plenty to talk about on this one, but I'll hand back to others to continue the conversation.